I love jumping my mountain bike. In fact, I've been jumping bikes pretty much my entire life and I feel really confident doing it. At home, watching this video, you've asked me to make a tutorial on how to jump for quite some time now. But teaching how to jump is a very difficult thing.
Get out of the way! This trail's advanced riders only, mate.
Anyway, I decided to bring two experts to help me out. So let's get going.
We go over what we call the anatomy of the jump. Dial back the size of the feature, and this goes to all aspects of riding, is learn to play in terrain to feel comfortable in the next level of terrain. The whole point of a point of commitment is that you make a conscious decision, I'm committed, I'm choosing to not adjust my speed through braking or pedaling. Our goal as riders is to ensure that we are stable in that moment. What happens is the terrain pushes you before you have a chance to control it.
The reaction force from the ground that's holding the front wheel up disappears. Being able to control that is really critical.
And then you're gonna be able to apply that technique to jumps all over the world and be safe when jumping.
For sure. And in the coaching world, we call that getting to that autonomous level of riding where you automatically make the right move through feel, through judgment based on experience you've gained.
So, for today's video, I am in Vancouver, Grouse Bike Park, Grass Mountain, and to teach you how to jump, I brought with me two experts. We've got Ross Dunlop, mountain bike coach for GSMBC, and for the technical, nerdy part, we've got Steve Matthews from Borstlong Suspension that later on is gonna tell us about physics and suspension settings and really what happens with your bike as you're about to take off. So Ross, can you tell us a little bit of your coaching background?
Yeah, so I've been coaching mountain biking for over 15 years now, full time up in Whistler. And one of my main roles as well with GSMBC, or the Global Syndicate of Mountain Bike Coaches, is to act as a mentor for new coaches and developing coaches. And we have a full curriculum of helping to train coaches as well as certify them to teach effective, safe practices for coaching, but also understand the nuances that I think will lead to quality riding that you possess. And I'm excited to get into some of those fundamentals within jumping. And the cool thing I think will be today is I think we're gonna hopefully connect how even riders who aren't super strong with jumping yet, they nail down the fundamentals, they're gonna essentially be doing the same things that you do when you jump and other pro riders, but then how they can build on that and add some of the finer details that add to style, and doing bigger, more technical jumps.
Okay, so just in terms of the style of jump we're gonna see, obviously there is doubles like this one behind me, tabletop, step up, step down, drops. So those tips and skills that you're gonna teach us today, for what type of jumps are they?
Well, I think the cool thing is the stuff we're going to cover with the fundamentals, it's very adaptable for different styles of jumps. It's really going to be understanding what we can control, whether it's the speed, the when and how much we add a pressure into the bike, as well as when and how much we absorb to adjust our trajectory. So the short answer is all jumps, which is really cool. But it's so important as we develop as riders to understand that we can adjust those dials within our technique to really just have options when we ride.
Okay, well, let's start and look at the first steps.
Okay, so Remy, I think a good starting point is for us just to go over what we call the anatomy of the jump before we get going. The reason we do this is it's important for us to have a common language so that anytime I refer to things that you know what I'm talking about. And this is something we try and standardize within any time I coach anyone. So first thing is we've got the run-in, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then we have what we call a point of commitment. And the whole point of a point of commitment is that as you ride, you make a conscious decision, I'm committed, I'm choosing to not adjust my speed through braking or pedaling. And the reason for this is it helps us ensure we're in a nice centered, stable position without making any adjustments that could put us off. After that, we have what we call the transition. which is the curvy bit here, shown really nicely there. And so the transition is where all the magic with jumping really happens. And this is where we experience the forces of the jump pushing on us.
That's where the bike compresses.
Yeah, the bike will compress. So
The body.
yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much our most important part. And then the bit that kind of as it straightens out, that's what we call the ramp part. And then at the very top, and the way you can think of this is it's almost like the coping of a half pipe, whatever, the very end, that's what we would call the lip. Okay. And then on this jump, we've got a bit of a table, a case pad, and then the knuckle. But we'll get to landings a little bit later.
Okay. Sounds good.
So what we do next, once we know what we're dealing with, obviously this depends a little bit about your own level. This jump, you can't really just roll it and sort of knuckle it safely. But if we put it into the context of someone who's working on their technique, whether it's on learning blue jumps, or it might even be someone who can do this jump, but runs into difficulties, has some scary moments, you want to detune the terrain a little bit, revisit some blue tabletop jumps. What I would ask you to do now is simply just to roll through the jump at a pretty common trail speed, at the speed that you could maybe clear the jump with, in a nice tall, what we call neutral position. And then the goal there is just to roll through and absorb any pressure you feel. And what this does is it tells you about the timing of when the terrain pushes you, because that's going to inform us as to when we're going to add the press later on. So we've done a little bit of a roll through, we've done a warm up, we've kind of learned kind of the rough speed, the run in for the jump. Where on the transition do you feel like you notice that terrain pushing into you?
So for me, it's really gonna be, well, as you mentioned, the transition, which is basically when the slope changes, right? So in this moment, it's perfectly flat and then starts to go uphill. So where it starts to go uphill is where my bike wants to dig into the ground and where I feel like my weight becoming heavier. But obviously on some other jumps that have more of a downhill takeoff, if that makes sense, it's not necessarily when it goes up, but it's when you go from going down steep to going down less steep, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And when it comes to from a technique standpoint, when people are learning to get better at this, our goal as riders is to ensure that we are stable in that moment through the change. And actually a thing that could help other people in other regards is the same rules apply in bermy corners.
Yes.
If you don't press and stand strong through the curvy part of the bermy corner, you tend to slide back. And in a corner, that tends to result in an understeer potentially. In a jump, it can lead to way more catastrophic things like getting that looping over the front sensation. So one goal here after we've done our warm-up is to establish where we want to press. And then the goal is to focus on applying a little bit of a press to stabilize us in the bike in that moment. And then at the early stages of this, what we want to do is we want to focus on absorbing a little earlier so we don't float super high.
Yeah.
And again, depending on where you're at in your progression, we might pick a jump that is completely okay to come up short on and get a little bit of air. But maybe for a more advanced rider, as a safety mechanism, you might just focus on just trying to get roughly towards the knuckle, but without risking it, and that absorb helps you control that stability at the lip.
Yeah, totally. Like some jumps you have to really commit and be extremely precise from the start, but some jumps in some bike parks, if you don't know the trail, and I can see that, you know, I might not be extremely confident on the speed, and I can see I can case, I might go a little bit fast and squash the jump a little bit towards the lip, so I don't take as much air as I should. Maybe do sometimes what we call a safety case, where I purposely want to come a little bit short because, you know, the landing might be really steep and there's some obstacle on the landing, and I'm not worried necessarily about the jump, but more about controlling my speed after the jump. So yeah, depending on the jump, I always adapt. But all the stuff that you've been mentioning is stuff that really transfer, whereas I'm, you know, riding a fairly easy jump or a very technical jump. Like the transition that you've been mentioning is where I feel most things can go wrong if I mess up the timing.
Yeah, for sure. And a common thing for riders, maybe you're a bit nervous coming in, is you maybe get passive. And if you get passive, what happens is the terrain pushes you before you have a chance to control it. So a little phrase I like to use quite often is introduce yourself to the jump first, as in just settle into the pedals, initiate a little bit of a press, just so that you can be in control of that pressure dynamic, much like these kids are doing really well here. And that way you're in control and you're not reacting to the forces that the jump's pushing on you.
Yeah, and from obviously you've coached thousands of people. Myself, I haven't, but I spent thousands of hours filming in bike parks, and I have seen some pretty horrific crashes. Most of the time, it would be people that are coming onto a jump and that are passive. Maybe they are scared, but they passed the point of non-return, so they have to commit and they go a bit fast, and instead of being proactive and applying that pressure on the pedal to dictate what the bike is gonna do, instead they kind of sit back and the bike decides what the outcome is gonna be.
Yeah, and then they tense up and no one can be stylish in that situation.
When you teach coaching, do you talk about the mental aspect? And because jumping is really mental, you have to commit and you're gonna be in the air.
Yeah.
And once you are in the air, you can get hurt, but obviously you can get hurt once you touch the ground.
Yeah.
So do you ever talk about that?
Oh, for sure. And I think one thing I try and have a lot of people understand is, like, for example, this jump for many people to really work on dialing in their technique might be too scary. And so if you're looking to refine your technique, get more comfortable, get creative even, dial back the size of the feature. And this goes to all aspects of riding, is learn to play in terrain to feel comfortable in the next level of terrain. So we might want to consider even going to a more small, more mellow blue jump and really adjust the dials of when and how much we press, when and how much we absorb, to be able to adjust the trajectory. With that with different combinations, we might be able to float nice loopy floaty jump, or we might be able to do a low trajectory to absorb. And that way, as a rider, you're going to be really adaptable and have more tools available, so that then you can ride more confidently knowing that you can make these adjustments.
I mean, I feel like I do that all the time when I ride. Also, well, first of all, as you mentioned, to improve my skills overall, to fine-tune and remember the basics of biking and jumping, but also because that makes riding the same trail over and over still fun. Right? You can take a trail like this one and go just a little bit slower and having to pop everything, or go a bit faster and have to scrub speed of the jump. And I feel like that's a great way not only to get better, but also to keep having more fun on the bike.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the very fact that you've gotten to the level you have within riding means you already know how to become really good. Part of my role often is actually to help educate people how to do the same for themselves. The only difference is they maybe don't have as much time, or they've come late to the sport and they've got a job and stuff. So, but repetition, always looking to have a really dependable technique is a huge component of it.
Yeah, because repetition is what's gonna help you to build enough experience that you can become not more consistent, but extremely consistent. And you're gonna be able to recreate the same technique. And then you're going to be able to apply that technique to jumps all over the world and be safe when jumping.
For sure. And in the coaching world, we call that getting to that autonomous level of riding, where you automatically make the right move through feel, through judgment based on experience you've gained.
And that's almost the disadvantage that I have to teach jumping, is because for me it became so natural that it becomes extremely difficult to teach someone what I'm actually doing, because most of the time I don't really think about it. So coaching or helping another pro rider to do a very technical move that I have to think a lot about is easier in a way, because I can be very precise with your speed or how the impact is gonna feel. Whereas jumping a jump that's fairly easy, I don't really know what's going on.
The cool thing is you will tend to ride purely based on feel and a tactical way, not ever questioning the how you do it. It's like, how fast do I need? What line am I on? Like what feel am I after in that compression? So you can ride on feel. People who are learning this stuff, who haven't got the mileage under their belt and reps that you have, they might be thinking, do I know the how to do it? And the goal is to try and get beyond that.
We've been talking about the running, the position to have, what's happening when we press on the bike and as the bike takes off. What do we do in the air?
That's a good question. So, I mean, the cool thing about all the stuff we've talked about up to this point is if this is done well, if you're balanced in a nice stable position and you've managed the forces from the ramp effectively, then this is what will give you a free feeling to actually enjoy being in the air. And that's when we might, we will be able to make some moves to be more stylish. The other thing to consider is the when and how much we absorb. So for example, if I want to go high, I would push through the ramp and through the lip, and my absorption would happen in the air. So that might be when I get a little bit smaller in the air.
So you push the bike.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't pull the bike up like some people might do when they're clipped in underneath you. It's a bit more of an absorption through the hips.
So you let the bike go.
Yeah, you let the bike come up into you, and that'll give you a little bit more of a trajectory. If you're absorbing a little bit more at the lip, then same rules apply, but you're just not going to go high. Like that kid there, good example, floated up, allowed his hips to be his apex of trajectory. He felt he was in a free motion to be able to crack that whip there. When we get to the actual landing, honestly, the goal is just to enjoy the fruits of your labor and stand strong. It sounds almost too simple, but if all of the stuff before is done well, there's nothing, you just stand there, honestly. It's how I think about it. I don't know if that's how you think.
Yeah, like I don't ever focus on the landing unless I'm doing a very specific jump or gap that's got a super harsh landing. Most of the time on the bike park, as long as I ride the jumps properly and land on the landing, that means it's gonna be smooth because it's built by professional trail builder and they built it well, they built it for people to have fun. When I really focus on the landing is when I'm doing a gap or a gnarly drop or something that's not really meant to be done or something that's really extreme, like some of the drops at Rampage. Even if you land well, the impact is huge because of the size of the jump. So when landing, I focus on looking ahead at my run out, being strong on my bike, landing both wheels together. I think there is some exception to that, but for the most part, you want to land both wheels together and really being strong, stable, and just like you want your timing right on the takeoff, I also want the timing right on the landing. So I don't want to collapse on my bike. I want to get the tires to take the first part of the impact, then the suspension, then my body. I want my arms and my legs to work together. I want my hips, my hamstring, my lower back to be strong. So my entire body works as one, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose one other thing to add for more technical, maybe shorter landings is in the air, you might choose to nose the bike in, and that would be probably a scenario where you focus on landing front wheel first, rear wheel at the same spot. And that can happen when you kind of use that little bit of that sort of scooping action that you can learn from just a basic maneuver like a rear wheel lift. And that's why a lot of the maneuvers you learn as a sort of a more novice rider actually scale towards maneuvers like jumping, where you can, those skills you learned over time can compound into other more technical things.
Yeah, I would say I was going to ask you the question, but I guess I'm going to answer it. One of the best way to progress at jumping, as you mentioned, is repetition. And there's no better place than a bike park where you can take the lift and just do the same trails over and over and over.
Yeah, we've had those same kids lap past this and probably 10 times today.
Okay, now I feel more confident with my jumping, and I also feel more confident with my ability to teach people how to jump. But I still have a few questions.
Okay.
What should I do with my fingers when I jump?
With your fingers? Well, I mean, we always say that when you're jumping, when you're doing anything in mountain biking, to cover your brakes just in case. So I think that's definitely the safest bet. It depends, are you prone to just grabbing a handful of brakes in a sketchy situation?
To be honest, as a pro rider, that still happens to me where sometimes I panic a little bit and brake. I know I shouldn't brake in the air.
Yeah.
I do use my rear brake sometimes to balance the bike and dive the front a little bit.
Moto style.
Exactly.
Yeah, I saw you do that earlier.
Yeah. So I did a jump earlier, and first time doing that jump, for safety measure, I angled the bike front wheel a little bit higher than I should have, and I had to use my rear brake, just a little tap, to get the front wheel to dive and land smoothly. Often I approach a technical jump or a scrub, and I don't really know if I should have my finger on the brakes or not, especially for scrubs and whips.
Yeah.
I feel like when you whip or scrub, you're just so aggressive. I feel like I could by accident press on the brake, which would be bad. So often I'm like, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And as I'm coming to the lip, I still haven't decided.
I would say that this is one that you would, if you're trying to dial down the fundamentals, always think about covering your brakes. But once you're in that experiment phase of your technique, then go for it. Like, explore, hey, do I have the mentality to drop in and hit this jump death grip? Like, that's a valuable thing to do, because then that can build that commitment to potentially jumps that you absolutely can't brake. Because sometimes you can build up the habit of doing like a panic like brake just before. Everyone has probably done that. I know sometimes it happens to me. So sometimes for me, tactically, I might be like, okay, let's hold those grips and make sure I don't use my brake. For me as a coach, one of my goals is to strip away the variables. So what I might try and pick a drop-in spot that I know I don't need any pedals, I don't need any braking, so that then with whoever I'm working with, I can categorically say, hey, this line here, roll in, no cranks, no pedals. That is gonna get you to the landing with the technique that we're working on. That can build confidence, because if it's often variables that can get people nervous. Yeah. Like, for example, a little brake check or 2 cranks. How powerful are those cranks?
Exactly, yeah.
So like, and that'd be a good tip is trying to remove variables at the early stage before you then can add variables like speed and all that stuff for adaptability. Cool. Now, so we've moved on to way more of an advanced trail now, but the important thing to realize from a technique standpoint is the fundamentals of jump technique remain the same, but a couple of things are a bit more variable. In this one here, we've got a bit more trail speed, so the speed of approach is going to impact things with the timing and our strength required. As we talked about before, we've got the shape of the compression and how that's going to affect our body and our bike. And we might have the just sheer size of the jump here. One thing I want to point out here specifically is that in that transition, as we come in with more speed, if we're not in a strong position in that press, what can happen is our legs can collapse a little bit. And that can result in our weight getting pushed back to the rear wheel, which can have a similar effect to the same scenario as if we're a bit more scared of the jump. Other things that it can result in is if we don't get that right, then it can affect our ability to feel free up the ramp. And if you look there, a couple of those kids were actually adding a bit of style there. And Remy, I want to ask you a bit of a question here. That kind of whole idea of a dead sailor, that non-stylish jump, for you personally with when you ride, how do you avoid that scenario?
Well, first of all, dead sailor are probably one of the scariest things you can experience when jumping. For me, there's 2 things: dead sailor and also misjudging the speed. when I do a dead seller these days, it's typically because I misjudge the speed and I wanted the balance of my bike to nosedive a little bit to catch the landing, but if I end up going too fast, then I go past the landing and obviously I keep rotating forward. So in situation like that, to avoid doing dead seller, typically because I'm aware of the compression and I'm aware of the chances that I miss my timing, I typically want to come a little bit slower and be a little bit more active on my bike, push a bit further into the suspension and take advantage of the lip in order to travel the distance of the jump to make it to the landing. We've seen the kids doing style. I also feel like if I move the bike in the air, I am less likely to do a dead seller. I don't know the theory behind, but I feel like if I stay more active on my bike, I'm less likely to be a passenger and therefore getting back forward.
I think as well from the coaching perspective, sometimes just having the goal of moving in the air or doing something, even whether it's a bar turn or a little tabletop, it takes your mind off of the actual like piece of the setup piece. And if you've already got that as being automated within your technique, then you're not worrying about something you can already do quite well. And then you just focus on, okay, I want to create a little bit of range of movement in the air. So I think that can potentially be something that probably comes into play for you.
Yeah, totally. Another thing I'd like to touch on, and this is gonna be, a feedback for Steve in terms of bike setup and suspension, and also for yourself who've coached people all over the world, is what I see when I'm filming on bike parks like that. I see people activating their core and being strong on the landing of the jump, which you should, because you're falling off the sky onto the ground, so you want to be strong, use your core and let the bike do some of the work at first, and then your body takes the second part of the impact. But very often I see people underestimating how much forces go through your bike and your body when you get into the lip. And this jump behind me is a great example. You don't go that fast, the jump is not that big, and yet it's a big compression and you are really likely to underestimate it, therefore get back forward. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, this is a situation where it's really critical to make sure your bike is set up stiff enough. If you are blowing through the travel that much that you are bottoming out on the lip of the jump, which actually happens surprisingly often, then you're having something really sudden, like a sudden violent impact happening right at the most critical moment, right? So it disrupts your sense of what the bike is doing. You don't have a smooth, continuous platform to push against. You've got something that suddenly changes. You get a spike of force through your rear wheel right at the wrong moment. So that really destabilizes the bike, and you have very, very small amount of time to react to that. So from a physics standpoint, what's happening here is that as we're compressing the bike, we're compressing from the ground up, basically. Ground pushes up, you push down. Everything in between is getting sandwiched. So that means you're springing your tires. What is happening as you leave the lip of the jump is that your front wheel leaves first, obviously, right? But that means that the reaction force from the ground that's holding the front wheel up disappears. And so when you've only got the rear wheel being lifted up but not the front, you're getting rotated forwards. Being able to control that is really critical. The reason that stiff springs help a lot here, and the reason that they make the bike a lot more predictable, is that you have much finer control over that, and you stay further out of the progressive end stroke, right? So all forks and virtually all rear ends are somewhat progressive, meaning that you have a bigger change in force from a smaller movement deeper in the stroke than you do at the start of the travel. So earlier in the travel, things tend to be more predictable. The result of that is that stiffer springs mean you have finer control, much like more precise control over that tire pressure as you live in the lip, and therefore over how much you're getting kicked forward or rotating forward to match the landing of the jump there.
Quick question for you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about spring rates.
Yep.
When we talk about compression on a jump like this one, what type of compression impacts the way your bike rides? Low speed, high speed, both?
Typically both of them. It depends on the exact way that the compression damper is designed as to which adjuster is dominant or how much they do at all. Some dampers are just very lightly valved and you can go from full soft to full firm and it won't really make that much difference. But in order of priority, spring rate, compression damping, and then rebound damping, which is a common misconception. It sort of seems logical that the rebound damping would be what stops you getting bucked forward. But while the bike is typically extending as you're leaving the lip, it's not necessarily extending all that fast. What is actually tipping you forward is the reaction force at the tire. It's not just the spring bouncing you like a pogo stick. So it's the reaction force at the tire when the front wheel is off the ground and the rear wheel isn't. That's really what's rotating you around. And so controlling that is really what's key.
And now I'll just finish that segment by saying that Steve and I have been doing videos about bike setup and basically a complete guide to understand mountain bike suspension. So make sure you go and check it out. And I think this video is pretty much done. Next one will be about drops. So we're still getting some airtime, but this time we're falling from the sky instead of going up the sky. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please check out the links down below. There is a code on Vorsprung suspension that will give you a discount if you purchase either a Seekers or a Smashpot and a Telum rear shock. We'll see you next week.